Hey there, everybody. It's been a while since I've had an opportunity to make a deck tech video like this, but I am really excited for Shimmering Skies, and here I have the deck everyone has been talking about, or at least the deck I've been talking about a lot, the Amber Amethyst Hyper Aggro deck. Now, I think this is the best aggro deck Lorcana has ever seen. The new cards we got in Daisy Duck and Amethyst Chromicon, I believe, really shored up the deck's weaknesses, the biggest issues the deck had, and together, I think they're really going to power this to a competitively viable aggro deck, which is awesome, and I'm super excited. So what we have here is basically a deck that is playing a pile of cheap, aggressive threats, and the idea is to end the game as fast as possible before your opponent is able to even utilize all the cards in their hand, which is important because Daisy Duck and Amethyst Chromicon will be drawing your opponent's cards, so it is vital, absolutely vital, that we end the game as fast as possible. But okay, how do we do that? Well, we've got a ton of one-drops. Look at this, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 4 copies of 6 different one-drop characters. That is 24 one-drop characters, nearly half the deck. 4 Lilo, 4 Maleficent, just the standard generic one-drop quest for 2 aggressive characters that we've had since set 1. We have Pascal, the evasive Amethyst character. You will almost always have other characters in play. This is basically the exact same as Pegasus in this deck. A very strong threat. We have the 2 cantripping Amethyst characters, the Turnbox Followers, the Magic Broom. The nice thing about these characters is that if they're ever under threat of being challenged, you can just quest with them one last time and then use them to draw cards so that you never lose them in combat. And then, of course, the new Daisy Duck. And so what Daisy is a 1/4 for 1 uninkable that quests for 2, and whenever Daisy quests, your opponent reveals the top card of their deck, and if it is a character card, they put that card in their hand, otherwise it goes on the bottom. And this card is amazing. It does a ton to improve Amber aggro decks. Yes, it gives your opponent's card advantage, but if you can end the game before they're able to utilize those cards, it doesn't matter. And a 1/4 body is extremely difficult to remove. Almost no cards that cost 1 or 2 in Lorcana can deal with this Daisy Duck. Cards that come to mind, really, just like Ruby Gaston, there's not a ton. They can utilize 2 characters to challenge it down, or a character challenging it 2 turns in a row. But it is likely to get at least 2 quests in a lot of matchups, and that is exactly what you're looking for out of a 1-drop. Beyond that, as far as 2-drops, I've got 4 copies of Piglet, 2 copies of Pinocchio. Piglet's an amazing aggressive threat, quests for 3, which is crazy for a 2-drop. Pinocchio, it's not my favorite card, it's uninkable. Yes, it quests for 3, but it's very susceptible to removal, and I'm playing 2 copies mostly just because although the ideal start with this deck is a 1-drop on turn 1, followed by 2 1-drops on turn 2, you won't always have 3 1-drops in your opening hand, so it's important to have some number of aggressive 2-drops to fill that slot on the curve when necessary. Plus, sometimes it's really nice to play a 2-drop and a 1-drop on turn 3 as well. 2 copies of Snake Mim here. Snake Mim, just a versatile card. You can use it to bounce your Goat Merlin. You can use it to bounce Donald Duck to get an extra lore. You can use it to bounce Rabbit or Dolores to draw cards. And of course, it protects Pinocchio, Maleficent, Lilo, and Daisy Duck when those opportunities arise as well. It's a little bit tempo negative. This isn't exactly a deck that wants to be picking characters up, but I do think it fits well enough, and you can play it as a 3-drop often enough. You'll quest with a Lilo, play Snake, replay Lilo, something like that. Certainly a decent card. I could see removing them, but they're in the deck for now. On 3, we have 7 total bodyguards. 3 of this 03 Blue bodyguard that quests for 1, and when it's banished, you gain 2 lore. It's nice, a nice bit of reach. Pairs, well with something like Goat to close out games. Oftentimes you'll get to 15, 16 lore. You just need to find a way to squeak, an extra 4 lore in, and copies of Goat and Blue do a really nice job of that. This Donald Duck is awesome, comes down, it's inkable, which is nice. Oftentimes you want to be inking your 3 and 4 drops in this deck because you have Amethyst Chromicon, you just want to empty your hand as fast as possible, so it's nice that this is inkable. But it comes down, it basically guarantees 1 lore immediately by giving one of your characters in play an extra lore pip until the end of turn, and then, it plays bodyguard and sometimes can protect one of your better questers for a turn, thereby sort of netting 2, 3 lore, which is all you really want out of a card. Then 4 copies of Fox Mim. I had considered not playing any of these Snake or Fox Mims in the deck, but unfortunately I do think the mirror match is going to be pretty prevalent, and really the only way for you to deal with opposing Daisy Ducks is Fox Mim, so I think for now, you just kind of have to jam 4 of these in your deck. You don't really have much choice, so here's Fox Mim. It also obviously can protect your other threats and, bounce your Merlins, as mentioned previously when I talked about the Snake. Then, before I talk about Rabbit and Dolores, I just want to run down to Amethyst Chromicon. This is, I think, kind of the glue for the deck. It is the main draw engine this deck has. You want to empty your hand as fast as possible, and then something like turn 4, play an Amethyst Chromicon, and just start drawing 2 cards every turn. Now, one issue that aggro decks have tended to have in the past is that they would run out of gas. They would empty their hand, and then you're just drawing cheap one-drops that just aren't good enough in the mid to late game to end the game. But Amethyst Chromicon gives you repeated card draw, which means you can actually keep up in cards with, Ruby Amethyst, the Sapphire ramp decks. You can just draw 2 every turn, and you never run out of gas, which is amazing. You just keep the pressure on, unless your opponent is able to remove an item, which is just not that common in Lorcana. But I did feel that 4 copies of Amethyst Chromicon was not quite as much card draw as I wanted in my deck. I don't really like Friends. This deck is so fast now that I think Friends is kind of too slow to put in your deck. Plus, it's nice to be able to blank opposing 2-drop Ursulas out of Emerald decks. So I chose to play 2 copies of Dolores and 1 copy of Rabbit Merlin. I started with 1 copy of Rabbit Merlin because I'm already playing the Foxes and 2 copies of Snake. I think having 1 copy of this in your deck is really nice. If you don't draw the Amethyst Chromicon, this gives you a way to get repeatable card draw, which is really powerful. Unfortunately, 4 is kind of expensive for the deck. It only quests for 1, so it's quite slow. And I do think multiple copies of Rabbit Merlin are pretty bad in an aggro deck like this, so that's why I stuck at just 1. And then instead I'm playing 2 additional copies of Dolores, which is, a card that comes down, quests for 2, nice and aggressive, but also can draw a card a lot of the time. And basically the reason I'm playing this over Merlin is just that it's inkable. There is a new Amethyst 4-cost evasive 2/2 that quests for 2 that draws a card when it is banished. The reason I chose Dolores is specifically because Dolores dodges a lot of removal. This dodges Sisu, this dodges Brawl, this dodges Grab Your Sword, as well as Fire the Cannons and Baboom, whereas a 2/2 would not. And I think that's really important out of a 4-drop. I think if you play a 4-drop, even if it cantrips, you really don't want to have it removed before you're able to quest with it. I feel like, playing a 4-drop and having it get hit by Grab Your Sword and die is just like putting all your eggs in one basket. The deck's already kind of weak to Grab Your Sword, so I just like having something like this that is a little bit more resilient. And I do think that the vast majority of the time you're going to be inking this 4-drop anyway, so exactly which card it is often doesn't matter too much, and it could change in the future. But yeah, so that's the characters. The only other cards left in the deck, since I already talked about Chromicon, are 4 copies of Befuddle. Befuddle is really, really strong in this deck, to go with our 24 1-drop characters. This can, basically count as an extra 1-drop instead of, playing 1 more 1-drop of your own. You can protect your existing characters in play by bouncing something like 2-drop Gaston or the Amber 2-drop Ursula, which is a really big threat for a deck like this. Just helps you maintain tempo, stay ahead on board, and an all-around great card. And again, since we're already playing cards like Daisy and Amethyst Chromicon and trying to negate the importance of the amount of cards in your opponent's hand, the fact that this puts things back in their hand is actually just not that important for this deck. It's not that different from just like banish a character that costs 2 or less, given that your opponent's gonna have 5 cards in hand anyway. And then 2 copies of Queen's Castle. Queen's Castle, is a little bit slow. There's only so many 4-drops you can play in a deck like this when you're trying to empty your hand as fast as possible. But I do like that it's a location and attacks on a different axis from, the standard aggro suite we have here. I do think it opens up a lot of nice plays. Sometimes you'll find yourself with like a Piglet and a Lilo in play, but your opponent has some characters in play on turn 3, and you can just choose not to quest with them, wait 1 turn, and then play Castle on turn 4, and then quest on turn 4, and now your opponent won't be able to remove all of your characters and the castle, and therefore you get a little bit more value out of your characters. You can do the same thing with multiple characters. Like if you have a Lilo in play, your opponent has 1 character in play, but you're going to play 3 more characters this turn. You can, of course, choose not to quest with your Lilo for 1 turn and then do it next turn when your opponent is sort of overloaded. But with Castle, it's really easy because Castle has basically 7 willpower, which is a really, really high number. But yeah, that's the deck. I think it's really, really strong. I did have a chance to play some games against Lab Humble on Tabletop Simulator, so I will be showcasing those for you. And yeah, it's a ton of fun. The deck worked out really, really well. It actually overperformed my expectations. It's currently playing 18 uninkables, which is a little high, but it's not that unreasonable. And you can often win games by sticking at 3 ink, or at least 3 ink for multiple turns. As far as cards I'm not playing, there is one notable omission that maybe you've seen and thought I'd be playing from the new set, so I will talk about that. Gathering Knowledge and Wisdom is a 2-drop Amethyst uninkable that just says gain 2 lore, and the reason I'm not playing any of it, well, there's a number of reasons. First of all, it's bad in your opener. What you really want to be doing with this deck is playing threats to the board that threaten to quest multiple times and demand answers from your opponents. And Gathering Knowledge and Wisdom does not demand an answer, and thus it's not a very good card in the early and mid game when you want to be deploying threats. So it shines primarily in the late game, but there's only so much room for an uninkable 2-drop that's kind of only good in the late game, because it's tempo negative. If you play it on turn 2, yeah, your opponent just doesn't have to care, right? You gain 2 lore, so what? They don't have to challenge it down. They can build out their board, now you're falling behind. Similarly, I think they're kind of bad in multiples because they get stuck in your hand, and I think that you need your cards to average slightly more than 2 lore, and obviously Gathering Knowledge and Wisdom can never do that. It can never be more than 2 lore. Now, I do think that it has some potential, of course, because Reach is useful. Obviously, we know from cards like Goat Merlin and Baloo that cards that have uninteractable lore gain can be quite valuable, especially in the late game, especially with something like an Amethyst Chromicon in play. So I do think that it has some potential, and it wouldn't surprise me if a couple copies eventually ended up in this deck, although I highly doubt we'll ever see 4 copies of Gathering Knowledge and Wisdom in, the final versions of this deck. I think the biggest reason I'm playing 0 copies is that I think it's a much worse card than Baloo. So Baloo is a 0/3 that basically guarantees 2 lore, much like Gathering Knowledge and Wisdom, but it has potential to gain so much more, right? So you play it. Now, if your opponent doesn't answer, it's going to gain 3 lore, right? So if you don't put it in bodyguard mode, it itself can quest. Then it gains 2 lore when it's removed, and it costs your opponent 1 lore because they have to challenge into it. So that's sort of a 4 lore swing out of Baloo. And that's before we even talk about the potential for Baloo to do something like protect Lilo, right? So if you play Baloo, then it protects Lilo, you gain 2 lore from it, you get an extra 2 lore from Lilo, and your opponent couldn't quest. That's basically a 5 lore swing. Again, Gathering Knowledge and Wisdom could never. And so, given that, I would never play a single copy of Gathering Knowledge and Wisdom before I was playing 4 copies of Blue, and I'm only playing 3 copies of Blue. So I think that's kind of where I stand on it. I think where the card will shine most is in Amethyst decks that are not Amber, decks that don't have access to a card like this for Reach. There, I think it makes a lot more sense. It's not competing for slots. But yeah, that's the deck, and I had a chance to play against Lab Humble, so I'm going to jump into some games and showcase the deck for you. Alright, we are here playing some games with Amber Amethyst Hyper Aggro against Humble. Labyrinth Humble playing a Blurple deck. On the mulligan here, basically what I'm looking for is that Chromicon plus a pile of 1-drops. If you have the Chromicon, honestly, the best cards in your deck are just all of your 1-drops. In this case, I'm going to keep the Goat just to make sure I have enough Inkables. The last thing you want is to mulligan too aggressively when you have a good hand and end up with too many Uninkables to actually play the cards you have. But as it is, we draw into a total of 3 1-drops, which is often the ideal play. You want to go 1-drop and then 2 1-drops on turn 2. So it's a very, very strong hand. We should be able to empty our hand quickly and then leverage Chromicon for card draw in the late game. As far as Blurple goes, I think probably the best 1-drop in the deck is Pascal, just because it's very, very difficult for them to answer an evasive threat. They don't have Ruby or Steel removal. They kind of rely on challenging to do their board control. Alright, Humble has taken his mulligan and taken his first turn inking a card. We're going to ink the Goat. Again, we want to get these expensive cards out of our hand so we can break parity on Chromicon as soon as possible, basically by going as wide as we can, as fast as we can. These Goats are obviously good cards, but they're not super great in the early game, and especially when we just want to be going as wide as we possibly can. I'd forgotten to draw, which is why I draw 2 there, so on turn 1 I hadn't drawn a card. Just remedying the error there. Not super used to playing on Tabletop Simulator yet. These were the first games I played. But yeah, just kind of embracing the fact that we're going to be drawing our opponent a bunch of cards this game. They get a Mickey Mouse there off the Daisy trigger. But we have the Chromicon in play. There's just no way around the fact that we're going to give them a pile of cards, and we're going to try and break symmetry by just not letting them actually utilize the mountain of cards we draw them. Okay, so Mickey Mouse to ramp, get a Magic Broom in play. Yeah, just going to ink another Merlin, play a Piglet and a Magic Broom, continuing to go wide. My opponent's going to basically need a Fox this turn to have any hope of winning. They draw an Elsa, and then they draw a Magic Broom off the Daisy. Again, we've already given them a ton of cards, but we're at 8 lore already. We're at 8 lore, we're ahead on board, we're threatening to get, even if they remove all these characters that we have, because we're threatening to gain 4 more lore next turn, and then just start gassing up the Chromicon, which is just crazy. So challenge with the Mickey Mouse. Quest with the Broom. It looks like they do have the Fox Mim. I'm just going to bounce Mickey back to hand, draw with the Magic Broom, use the Fox to take out a Daisy, and then has the Nut draw, the second Fox on the play. Crazy. Basically the best draw Blurple can have against us. Here's what you're seeing, and I think we're still winning, which is crazy to be still winning against the Nut draw on the draw. But I lead with the Chromicon here. Obviously draw cards before making your play. I'm definitely going to play Piglet and Chromicon based on the 3 cards I had in my hand at the start of the turn, which means I should play the Chromicon first to determine whether or not I draw something else that would change my mind. I do not. Just play the Piglet here, quest for 3. And I consider questing with Magic Broom, and end up deciding not to do that. And the reason I don't quest with the Broom here is because I don't want to expose it. I know my opponent has a Fox in hand. They just picked it up with the other Fox. If I quest with the Broom here, then I lose both my Magic Broom and the Exerted Piglet on Humble's turn, and I won't be able to quest for 3 with my other Piglet. So just, pump the brakes a little bit so that I can, get max value out of each of my cards. Now, he does play an early Elsa here, which is a little bit scary. I'm only at 11 lore, 1 card in hand. I was a little worried for a minute, but I think I think ultimately it's going to be okay here. So we draw with Chromicon, and again, he's got a pile of cards in hand, but it just doesn't matter. He can only play, 1 or 2 cards every turn. And all we need to do is leverage each card at this point for like, 1.5 lore on average, and we should be able to get there. I decide, given that I know my opponent has a Fox in hand, to play it safe. I pick up my Piglet and draw with my Magic Broom. And I was planning to play the Piglet, but drawing a second 1-drop here makes an even better play. I can ink the Piglet and play 2 1-drops. Just a little bit less susceptible to removal, less susceptible to second Elsa, so on and so forth. Obviously, Pascal, as I had mentioned, very, very good against Blurple. And I do have plenty of time to leverage it. Okay, so quest for 3, pick up the Elsa with Snake Mim. Now we do have to remember that the Elsa is over there, can lock down threats pretty easily. They're at the stage of the game where they have a pile of ink and can sort of repeatedly bounce the Elsa, but that's all right. So we activate Chromicon, draw yet another card, getting another Pinocchio. So I'm going to play 2 Pinocchios here. I know that he has the Elsa and can absolutely lock down these Pinocchios and challenge them down, but he can't challenge down every single character we have in play, so the Pascal should be safe, and this lets us be more lore efficient. Plus, it would be nice if we, had a way to bounce the scope before we play it, before exposing it to potential challenges. But okay, so they play the Elsa, lock down the Pinocchio. They're going to challenge a bunch of characters off of my board here. But, we get to keep the Foxman, we get to keep the Pascal. That's going to quest us up to 17, effectively 19 with this Merlin Goat, and this looks to be all but over at this point. Alright, so, yep, draw for turn, draw with Chromicon, quest up to 17, and, yeah, I think probably just playing Goat in a 1-drop, be ink efficient, kind of puts them between a rock and a hard place, right? They have to somehow remove Pascal and Goat, or lock the Goat down forever, but the moment we draw a bounce spell, it's going to be over. I think Hummel spent some time here. We were having a discussion between the two of us about what outs he could even draw in his deck, and I think the answer is there basically aren't any. There's just no way to deal with all of these threats repeatedly until the end of the game. I'm just a little bit too far ahead at this point. But yeah, now we're talking about, maybe he should have drawn cards before playing this Elsa, so I think he's going to take it back here and then try to find an out, but I just don't think it really exists in his deck at this point. Chooses to play the Elsa. I believe he chooses to lock down the Pascals here. The idea is that it's okay if the Goat quests for 1, as long as I don't have a bounce spell, and he's going to have to get lucky to win this game anyway. That will maybe buy him a single turn. Now, I have no idea how he could ever win on his next turn, which is basically what he's going to have to do here, but, he's giving it his best shot, I guess. But yeah, it looks like he's going to... quest up, play Fox. Yeah, it's just not going to do it. Technically I have lethal, but there's no way for him to gain 13 lore the next turn with just the 6 lore in play. Yeah, draw with Chromicon, and there we see a Snake Mim, which will do it, getting us all the way up to 20. Bouncing the Goat, the old Goat bounce. All right, yeah, took it down. Our opponent had a really, really strong draw on the play. 2 Foxes, good ramp, and we still never in doubt, I don't think. That's how strong the deck is. All right, we are here on the draw again with Amber Amethyst against Humble. Now, he's switched decks. I don't know what deck he's playing. I'm all getting in the dark, but basically I have the Chromicon, so basically what I'm looking for is a pile of 1-drops to empty my hand as fast as possible. And yeah, looks like we've got a pretty strong start. Daisy Duck into a 2-drop of choice, and then from there we can empty our hand and play Chromicon. Try and grind him out. All right, Humbles finishes mulligans. He's inked a Maui and played Popsicle. Okay, so I'm playing against Ruby Sapphire, and I'm happy to actually see another 1-drop there. It means I can go ahead and play 2 1-drops on turn 2 as well, which is always what I like to do to get as aggressive as I possibly can. Yeah, play Daisy Duck. At this point, there's sometimes a consideration for not playing Daisy Duck on 1 and drawing your opponent a bunch of cards unnecessarily if you have other good starts, but in this case, obviously, quest for 2, and I have the Chromicon in hand already, which means I already know that I'm going to be drawing my opponent a bunch of cards this game. There's no need to beat around the bush. May as well take the most aggressive start possible and end the game as fast as we can. I'm happy to draw Pascal here. Pascal, very strong against Ruby Sapphire. And yeah, just going to quest for 2, draw my opponent a Grammatala, get 2 more 1-drops in play. We may be on the draw, but it's a very nice start. And if we can beat Popsicle into 1 jump on the draw, it's got to be a good matchup, right? Like, there's just It's just not much better than that they can do out of Ruby Sapphire. Almost in the tank a little bit here. Should have brawl. I think he's thinking about brawling the Daisy Duck. And he does do just that, which is crazy. I mean, to think, my opponent had to spend their third turn just removing my 1-drop after it had already quested for one is just, it's just nuts to me. This deck is so crazy. Okay, yeah, just gonna play 2 more. 1-drops get super aggressive. Going on quest for 2, leave everything in play. I think this is a deck that the turn box followers and the magic brooms you'll often cantrip before, like, be prepared turns, before grab your swords turns, before Sisu turns, that sort of thing. But oftentimes you just want to leave them in play. They're best just left in play. Don't get too excited to draw with them. You want to get as much lore as you can. And he looks like Humble was in trouble. He did not have an ink this turn, but did play Sisu. So to me, that is a hard tell that he has Shift Sisu in play. There's no way he would have skipped ink to play that Sisu if he didn't have big Sisu in hand. So that's something to note for the future, to play around. But all right, we play Chromicon, draw a card, play Pinocchio again. Play the Chromicon first if you're going to be playing it. That way you can change your mind based on what you draw. Yeah, just questing for 1 million. Going to leave everything in play. Trying to end this game before big Sisu becomes a problem. Okay, small Sisu takes out Pinocchio. It's kind of sad to get that Pinocchio eaten by that Sisu trigger, but it is what it is. Okay, so he officially has Shift Sisu next turn, which means it's going to be a good time to cantrip some of these 1-drops. At this point, I'm starting to get a little bit worried that it's going to be hard to cross the finish line. I don't have any cards in play that I can use to play around Sisu. Everything sort of gets destroyed by that trigger. So I'm gonna quest with the Broom, then quest with Pascal for 2 using Donald Duck. Draw off the Broom. Obviously, Befuddle, not a lot of help here. Play that as ink, not super strong against Ruby Sapphire, obviously. Put another Chromicon in play. Again, no reason to commit additional threats when I know that I'm likely to be losing most of my board here. And yeah, just going to draw off of Turnbox followers. Obviously, very happy to see Goat. Goat's sort of exactly what you're looking for in these late game, pushes for the finish line. Okay, inks a Develop Your Brain and shifts the Sisu exactly as expected, but we only lose 2 characters, which is not so bad. Obviously, he does get to start questing here, and for 5 a turn, that's certainly a very real threat to end the game quickly with something like a Lucky Dime, but yeah, with 2 Chromicons in play, we have plenty of gas, so basically looking for just anything I can use to eke some lore out here. Obviously, those draws were not ideal. Was not looking to get 2 Befuddles, especially having drawn 1 last turn. I was pretty disappointed with that set of 3 draws, but that's okay. Here I'm gonna try and cantrip with the Magic Broom, I think. My concern was that if my opponent had another big Sisu, I didn't want to put a bunch of characters in play. Okay, that died a big Sisu. Instead, I choose to leave both Brooms in play and then play a character that doesn't die a big Sisu. I'm okay with Be Prepared. If my opponent has to play a Be Prepared, at least they wipe away their own threats. I was just really, really worried about getting board wiped by second big Sisu there. Humble having a pretty good think about it. And you can see the power of Chromicon. It's just, like, it draws so many cards. And again, our opponent has so many cards in play, but they can't leverage them all. We get to leverage all of these cards we draw for, the gas we need to cross the finish line. Okay, so he's definitely starting to get a very serious lore total going here. We're going to need to find some more goats, maybe some bounce effects, Baloo, that sort of thing. All right. Yeah, not great. I think, the draws we've had these last few turns were not ideal. Now, this is much better than last turn. The 2 Befuddles obviously was like the stone cold worst. But okay, we trade Goat for big Sisu. Get that off the board. Obviously, Sisu, a much bigger threat than our Goat is. And then we just go wide here. Asking them if they have it. What are the odds they have third big Sisu here? I think it's pretty unlikely. Certainly possible, but pretty unlikely. If they have to be prepared, again, that's not so bad. At least they have to lose their character as well. Thinking about inking Maleficent Dragon, not quite so sure about it. Okay, Sisu, I mean, that's a good sign. It means no board wipe. Ooh, Chicha. It's going to be a little bit slow here, and hilariously enough, actually gives us a target for our Befuddle if we want. Yeah, draw a card off of Chicha when using the Fishbone Quill, and at this point, I feel pretty good. I mean, we're just going to win the game by playing a character here and questing for lethal. pretty much out of ink unless he happens to find exactly Be Prepared to Sing off the developer brain, which I believe does not happen. So yeah, this is a really, really good showing, I think. You know, Humble obviously had, you know, an awkward stumble missing an ink early there, but we also had some pretty bad draws in the mid game as well. And yeah, we still took it down on the draw, which is fantastic, fantastic. All right, here we are on the draw again. Humble was getting very frustrated, so we were letting him go first a lot because this deck is very, very annoying to fight against. But yeah, so once again, I do not know what he's playing. I'm looking for a bunch of 1-drops and ideally an Amethyst Chromicon, which I do not find. That's okay. We've got a pretty aggressive start here, and he leads on a Daisy Duck of his own, so I don't know exactly what's going on, but now I'm a little bit worried. I'm glad I have these foxes in hand, but obviously in an aggro mirror, you definitely want to be the player going first. It's a huge advantage. So I'm going to ink the Donald Duck. It's going to be a little bit slow this game. Bodyguard, not likely to be super useful in my opinion. And I play Pascal, and the reason to choose Pascal here is just that it can't be challenged down by Daisy Duck or any other character particularly easily, so it's going to just sit on board and quest for 1 a turn, hopefully tick us up toward victory while we play control. Now we quest with Daisy, and I hit a befuddle. We're laughing because I have very, very few hits, obviously, that miss with Daisy Duck, so of course he would switch to Daisy Duck and immediately make me not draw a card. But that's all right. That's the way the game goes. And I think we're just going to play 2 more 1-drops here, quest with our Pascal, and hope to not get absolutely run over by this Daisy Duck. And obviously, we're pretty far behind here. I'm hoping these Foxmans can carry us to victory. I had to look at Sven. I hadn't seen Sven before. It was like, what does that card do? But yeah, funny. I'm not used to the Tabletop Simulator, so at the time I didn't know you could just hold Alt to make it bigger. I'm like trying to figure it out. Upside down, tiny font. He quests with Daisy Duck, and wouldn't you know it, I hit another befuddle. So I'm 0 for 2 on Daisy Duck triggers, which is just depressing. I'm already on the draw behind. I need all the help I can get. This is a very, very funny situation. But okay, draw Dolores, ink Dolores. It's going to be, again, too slow. Opponent's starting to run out of cards. I'm thinking on my turn, because I'm not sure whether or not I want to leave this Piglet in play and just eat, or leave both one of my opponent's characters in play. Like, I'm thinking, should I trade my Broom for Piglet with my Pascal? And ultimately, I do decide to trade both my characters into Piglet. Just the buy time. I was very, very concerned about not having enough time to catch back up. And they're already down to 3 cards. I feel like there's a reasonable chance we can play this game and beat them that way. Okay, pass back to Humble. Inks a Piglet. And uses Gaston to play the Humble signature card, Mufasa. And here, definitely going to want to make sure I challenge down this Gaston, preferably with the Fox in hand. So I'm assuming I'm going to ink something, play 1-drop, and then use my Fox to remove their Gaston, which is exactly what happens here. So challenge down Gaston, and then quest for 1. Okay. Maui. Now, I'm not actually too upset about the Maui here, mostly just because it's not a threat. It's not something I have to answer immediately. It's not going to gain Humble any lore. It's starting to be a tricky game. Like, what this Mufasa hits could be very, very important. But yeah, use my Fox, challenge down Mufasa. Have fun trying to figure out Tabletop Simulator. The Mufasa hits a Sisu, which is fine. It's not the best threat they could have hit. I'm not too upset about it. Especially since, I've got this goat I can play, and the goat can potentially eat the Sisu if I'm able to empty my hand next turn. Okay, so Humble goes up to 6, empties his hand, plays a Madame Medusa to remove my Maleficent, and at this point I'm thinking, I've got a decent shot. I'm going to eat this Sisu here. My opponent's going to be forced to challenge with Maui, either removing my blue or the Merlin. Now, I'm not sure whether or not I want to put this in bodyguard mode. It is an interesting decision for sure. I ultimately decided not to. I figured it doesn't really make a difference, right? They're going to be able to eat the blue for free anyway. May as well try to get 1 quest out of the blue before it dies. And Humble draws a Nessus, which is interesting. It was a card that I wasn't terribly familiar with, but it's basically just a giant vanilla character. Nothing special. It's a tricky spot. I don't know what to do here. I'm behind on lore. My opponent's questing. And I don't want to use Daisy Duck and draw my opponent cards because I'm already losing the race. I don't want to be behind on cards as well. So I think I'm just going to stand pat and, I don't know, hope to draw my way out of this one. Tricky spot for sure. All right, so Humble draws, and it's Mulan, which is great for me. Obviously, Mulan, not the the card you're hoping to draw when you're trying to close out a game. And we draw an Amethyst Chromicon. Now, I have to play it. You know, I have no choice. And so I play it. We both draw a card. Magic Broom, not quite what I was looking for. And then I just, like, quest with everything. I'm hoping that I can just eke this one out somehow. And he's able to quest up to 19. You know, obviously, if I'm not worried about drawing with Chernobog's followers because, you know, if he spends his time taking out my characters, that's good for me. It buys me more time. But obviously, we lose this one. So we finally lost a game on the draw against Mufasa. You know, obviously, I haven't shown every game we played so far in the video, but I believe we had played 5 games prior to this. I was on the draw 4 of them, and this is the first one I lost. This is my my 5th game on the draw. I finally lost a game with aggro. All right, well, that's the deck. Thanks a ton for watching. Huge shout out to Labyrinth Humble for jamming a bunch of games with me so I could test my list. I do think that the gameplay showcase does not fully show just how good this deck felt while I was playing it. Obviously, I could not show every single game we played, but I played 2 games versus Blurple. I went second both times. I won both games. I played 2 games versus Ruby Sapphire. I went second once, first once, won both games. I played 7 games against various Ruby, Amber, Mufasa builds. I went second 5 times. I won 6 of those 7 games. And against Steelsong, I went 1-3, going second twice, losing both games on the draw. So if you're keeping count, in 14 games, I had a combined 11-3 record with this deck. And I went second 10 of those 14 games. I never dropped a single game going first. And I dropped very few games going second. Now, I do think the deck loses the Steelsong, but overall, the deck feels really, really strong. I feel like any old Sapphire or Ruby deck from previous sets basically has no shot against this deck. It's just too fast. So decks are going to have to adapt. They're going to have to start playing cards specifically built to combat the Hyper Aggro deck. And the format is definitely going to see curves shrink from where they were in the previous format. As far as the deck itself, what would I change? There's a number of things I want to try. I want to try Shift Key to Line. I don't know if it's good. I want to try playing without Snake Mims. See if we can get a better card in there somewhere. I want to try playing fewer 4-drops. I want to try playing more 4-drops. I want to try playing the library. I think it is. It's the Amethyst location, like over Queen's Castle. It's you know, it gains 1 lore a turn. It has 7 willpower, but it costs 3 and it's inkable. And then anytime a character is banished there, you draw a card. I feel like it's another way to get some more card draw into the deck. Maybe I can cut some 4-drops for it. It's cheaper than the castle. The castle is a little bit expensive for the deck right now because the curve is so low. I'm not sure how good it'll be, but there's lots of things to try. I think there's room to improve this deck for sure. You know, exactly what cards you play will have to depend on how the rest of the metagame shakes out. But it felt very, very strong, and I highly, highly suggest you give this deck a try. Thanks.